Hello. Homeless advocate Eric Jonathan Sheptock coming at you. It is the night of October 26, 2017. Today is the 48th birthday of Lynn Allen, who last I knew lived in Micanopy, Florida, which is a few miles south of Gainesville and north of Ocala in north central Florida. Why do I bring her up? Well, it was a situation with Lynn Allen that led to me first becoming homeless in February of 1994. I haven't seen her since then. I obviously have committed these facts to memory for 23 years. So, anyway, story goes like this. It's kind of the reverse of the whole Bill Cosby, what's his name, Harvey Weinstein situation, where I was actually helping a woman who I had figured out was the victim of sexual violation, not just sexual harassment, but actual unwanted sex through a manner of extortion. So, I was working at Shands Hospital in Gainesville, Florida. I began working at Shands Hospital in May of 1988, and I worked there until February of 1994. I had a pretty cool job. I was a freight handler. Shands Hospital is really big. In the early 90s, it was the second biggest building in the country when you measure the floor space, surpassed only by the Pentagon. And Shands is always building, so it's probably number one at this point. But because it's so big, a lot of stuff gets driven in and out of the building. So I drove this electric train similar to what you see at the airports, loading luggage on the airplanes. I would drive out trash and dirty linen. I would drive in new supplies and clean linen. I would empty the chutes, the trash chute and linen chute, which were each these 4-foot wide pipes that ran from the roof to the basement. And on each floor you had a door where you can drop trash down the trash chute, linen down the linen chute. I was the guy who took stuff out at the bottom, loaded it in my carts, put it on my train, and drove it out. I would drive in new supplies and clean linen. I also ran the incinerator, because in a hospital you have white trash, red trash, orange trash, chemo waste, Centennial plastic waste, so orange bags, by the way, were called autoclave. That was the remains that came from the lab, with all the blood vials and other vials and what have you. And I don't even know what Centennial plastic waste was. I just knew that the container was gray and had the chemo waste symbol on it, so I just burned it. But anyway, never got stuck with a needle in 6 years. I never got sick from that job. Also ran the box baler, the trash compactor, and so it was an interesting job. And I worked night shift for the whole 6 years that I was there at the hospital. There was a woman named Lynn Allen who worked in security. She started working there around October of 1988 when she turned 19. Before she started working there, I was the youngest employee out of what was then a 4,500 person workforce at the hospital. Lynn and I hit it off rather quickly as friends. She worked evening shift from 3 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. I worked night shift from 11 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. And because I did my job so well, I was able to slack off a lot. I didn't get in trouble as long as I got my job done. And so I would go and chat with her during our overlapping time. And some days I would get there a little bit early. I had some leeway to decide if I wanted to come in at 10 p.m. instead of 11, and I would do that sometimes. But I would go and talk to her during our overlapping time, and I would walk her to her car a lot of times. She and I both like to rap, sing together, talk about current events, and we'd just shoot the breeze. We never met off the job. We only talked on the job, but we got along very well, and I knew her for just over 5 years, from the end of '88 to the beginning of '94. And so in the last few months, I noticed she was doing some weird things. On the not so weird tip was this. The information desk that she worked at as part of security, it had the two levels. It was a bi-level desk. The lower level for the one sitting behind the desk, and the higher level for the person standing in front of it. And this was around the time that several big stories came out. The Menendez brothers, who ended up killing their parents and claiming that they were sexually abused. Mike Tyson's rape case, and Michael Jackson being accused of child molestation. In each of those three instances, she made it a point to take the newspaper, open it up to the most recent iteration of any of those three stories, and place the paper on the upper level of the desk, so that when I came up to speak to her, the article was sitting right in front of me, and me being a bit of a news freak, news is still my favorite show more than 20 years later, I would always just take the bait and check out the article, and we'd end up talking about it. I would eventually realize that she did that to spur conversation about these different sexual allegations. She didn't do that with any other type of article. Other times, she'd keep the paper on the lower level of the desk right in front of her, and if I wanted to read it, I had to ask her for the paper. Let me see. And there were some other awkward moments. There was a time where she was out of work for several weeks. She was in the hospital, a different hospital than where she worked at. She worked at Shands Hospital. I heard she was staying in Alachua General to receive her care. She didn't want any visitors. I didn't know what that was about, as close as we were. Let me see. There were other things, but the one situation that really stood out, well, actually, two more things that I'll mention here. One was that she drove brick red Nissan Lynx. It would often break down. And I watched her on numerous occasions because her car broke down so often, and when it broke down, it stayed broke down for several days. And so on numerous occasions, she would call her brother to ask him to come pick her up. Now, this was right at the beginning of the advent of cell phones, by the way. And she would call him, and he would never answer. And the dozens of times that I watched her call him, never once did he answer. And on each instance, she would then give a sigh of disgust and call her father, her stepfather, and he would always answer right away. And I recall asking her, why don't you just call your father first thing rather than calling your brother who never answers when your father answers immediately? And she never gave me the answer. So I let it alone. And then there was one instance where she calls her father, but for some reason I wasn't there when she first called, and I wasn't aware that it was her father she was talking to, and I didn't know his name. So I hear her saying seductively at least 10 times, Jasper, Jasper, Jasper. And I'm thinking, like, this must be her boyfriend. Let me remind you that I did not hang out with her off the job. So when she got off the phone, I said, who's that? Your boyfriend? And she didn't answer. And I asked her 2 or 3 more times, who's that? Your boyfriend? And she wouldn't answer for the first several times. And finally she answered me with disgust in her voice, and she said, that's my father. And I put 2 and 2 together at that moment. And I said, well, evidently, she was reluctant to tell me that was her father. And more alarmingly, she was talking to him with a very seductive voice that I did a poor job of imitating. And that really made me think, okay, now it all makes sense. This is why she keeps calling her brother, who never answers the phone whenever her car is broken down. And this is why she's always disgusted when she has to call her father. And so when I finally figured it all out, and I put together all of what I told you and a few other things that happened, then I realized that it had taken me a couple of months worth of hints to finally put it all together, and I was anxious to help her. And I kept prodding her to tell me in no uncertain terms what was going on, and to let me help her. And she began to just shut down on me and put up the wall and not let me help her. I went to a rape crisis center in Gainesville, Florida, which at that time was located on Waldo Road. It might still be. I just haven't lived in Gainesville for some years now. I went to the Alachua County Sheriff, who said, the deputy said, if she won't open up, we can't help her. I went to the Gainesville Police. They said the same thing. I called the Marion County Sheriff as if there was going to be anything different, because that's where Micanopy is located. And they said the same. And there was even an occasion where, because the city buses didn't run from Gainesville to not Ocala, but Micanopy. It's about 15 miles south of Gainesville. Because the buses didn't run there, I actually began to walk. I didn't own a car. And I ended up walking about 8 miles, and somebody picked me up to give me a ride. And when I said I'm going to the house of Jasper Peacock, which I didn't even know where it was, but I knew that she lived with her father. And so it turns out the guy who picked me up knew exactly where the house was. And he dropped me off right in front of it. And I had an awkward conversation with her mother, who was raking and burning leaves at the time. And I shied away from making any direct allegations of sexual extortion, of sexual violation, or whatever you want to call it. but then after an awkward conversation, I began to walk back to Gainesville, and somebody gave me a ride after I walked several miles. And but anyway, it turns out that she was living with her stepfather and her mother, and she had several children, and she was working a low-wage job as a security officer at a hospital. And so she needed her parents, well, her mother and her stepfather, financially in order to make ends meet. And so I'm guessing that led to the sexual extortion that I have mentioned a couple times here. And so I played Sherlock Holmes, and then I kept trying to get her to open right up to me. And it got to the point where I went to the job a few hours early and tried to see what I could do to get her to open up. I even went on one night that she was working and I was off, and my supervisor, a guy named William Maxwell, came to me and said that he heard that I was harassing Lynn Allen. And I explained to him a shorter version of what I just said to you, and he wasn't upset. He seemed to understand. He wasn't going to write me up. He wasn't going to fire me. But I was just so upset that anybody would even imply that I was a sexual harasser, yeah, and that I just decided to abandon the job. I was just shy of my 25th birthday. As a matter of fact, my birthday is February 15th, and I ended up walking off the job on Valentine's Day, the day before my 25th birthday, and I was young and stupid, and I assure you that both of those things have changed now, not just one. And so I got insulted. I walked off the job. I got my last check a few days later. I left Gainesville, Florida, home of the University of Florida and of the Florida Gators. And Shands Hospital is part of the University of Florida, by the way. But I left that job. I went back to New Jersey, where I was born, in Atlantic City. I made a failed attempt to locate my birth parents, having been adopted. I wanted to confront them and find out more details about my child abuse, which led to my skull being fractured when I was 8 months old, which led to me going into foster care for almost 5 years, which led to me then being taken in by the Sheptocks. Rudy Sheptock was Polish. He passed away in 2000. Joanne Sheptock is Italian, maiden name Tedesco. She's now 80 years old and doing quite well. She now lives in North Florida, where she was affected by Hurricane Irma, which knocked down a couple of trees, but not on the house, and which knocked out her power, but she has a generator. And I have about 24 family members that live near her. About a half a dozen actually live on the same property in between two houses, and another 15 or 18, somewhere in there, live within a 2-hour drive of her, to the east and to the northeast. But anyway, I left Shands Hospital. I went back to New Jersey. I tried to find my birth parents. It didn't quite work out. And when my money ran out, I became homeless, and I got stuck in what I call the homeless rut of working low-wage jobs, day labor, farm work, and the like. And then I came to D.C. in 2005, began advocating in 2006, and here I am, almost 11 and a half years later. I have not been homeless the whole 23 years. I've gotten out several times. Uh, I worked. I got 3 different jobs out of day labor over the years, and with one of them, I actually ended up getting out of homelessness. Well, actually, I take that back. With 2 of them, I ended up getting out of homelessness, and one was a job I got in a town just south of Orlando, Florida, Taft. And I got that job in October of '97. I got laid off in March of '98. But I kept the place that I was in until June, and I became homeless again. Uh, and my return to homelessness had to do with a girlfriend, but I won't get into that story. Um, Let me see. Then there was another instance where I got a permanent job by working out of the labor hall, and that job was in Apopka, Florida, just north of Orlando. And then, but I was still homeless when I had that job. I never actually got out, and then I became homeless again. Then I got married in North Carolina. I was doing migrant farm work. I jumped on the farm crew in Florida, and then after harvesting cabbage in Florida, we went to North Carolina, where we were grading potatoes. So you don't really harvest them by hand. The machine harvests them, and then you grade them on a series of conveyor belts, and throw out the bad ones. And then the farm crew moved on, but I found love while I was working in North Carolina, not too far from Morehead City, and then I jumped off the bandwagon, if you will, and I stayed there in Morehead City with my newfound wife. That marriage lasted 5 weeks, and kind of like a Hollywood marriage, if you will. And when it fell apart, I had a job. I had found a job doing demolition work, and I got so depressed, and it's not clinical, but I felt so depressed that I walked away from everything, including the job, and I became homeless again. But as you can see, a lady friend who I was not dating, but who I was trying to help, was the reason for my initial homelessness. And 2 of my returns to homelessness were the result of bad relationships, dating relationships. Well, one was a dating relationship and one was an actual marriage. So there is a strong correlation between women problems, good friend, girlfriend, and wife, and my homelessness. I have become homeless following problems with 3 different women on 3 different occasions. But I'm not blaming women. I'm just saying that there's a correlation. I'm not placing blame. But at any rate, there you have it. So for anyone who wants to know how I became homeless initially and how I became homeless on 2 successive occasions, well, there you have it. The first occasion was actually because of me doing the reverse of Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, and certain other high-profile figures. I was actually trying to help a woman who I realized was being sexually violated and sexually extorted because of her financial dependence on her stepfather and her mother, while she, the younger woman, was working at a low-wage job and had several children to feed. All right. And once again, today is October 26, 2017, and it is the 48th birthday of Lynn Allen, the woman who is connected with my original bout with homelessness, which began a few days after my 25th birthday, with me having lost my job or walked away from my job on February 14th of 1994. All right, thank you.